The morning mist hung low over the rolling hills of the Cotswolds as Dr. Oliver Whitmore made his rounds through Meadowbrook Animal Sanctuary, his wellies crunching on the frost-covered grass. At 62, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, Oliver had dedicated his life to rescuing animals that society had written off as hopeless. But in 30 years of sanctuary work, he'd never encountered a creature as broken as the Highland bull standing alone in the far paddock. Shadow stood motionless against the stone wall that separated his enclosure from the others, his massive frame silhouetted against the gray English sky. His shaggy coat, once the rich russet brown typical of Highland cattle, had dulled to an almost black color from neglect and trauma. What made him truly distinctive, however, were the scars that crisscrossed his hide like a road map of suffering, rope burns around his neck, whip marks along his flanks, and most heartbreaking of all, the deep gouges around his eyes where a cruel owner had tried to blind him to make him more manageable. The bull had arrived at Meadowbrook 6 months ago, rescued from a backyard slaughterhouse in Manchester, where he'd been kept in conditions that defied belief. The RSPCA officers who'd brought him in had warned Oliver that Shadow was dangerous, unpredictable, aggressive, and likely to attack without provocation. But Oliver had seen enough traumatized animals to recognize the difference between true aggression and defensive fear. Shadow wasn't dangerous. He was terrified. In the 6 months since his arrival, Shadow had never allowed a human within 10 feet of him. He ate only when no one was watching, drank from the water trough in the dead of night, and spent his days pressed against the farthest corner of his paddock, watching the world with eyes that held no trust, no hope, and no expectation of kindness. The sanctuary's other animals seemed to sense his pain and gave him respectful distance, as if understanding that some wounds ran too deep for casual comfort. "Still no progress with our Highland friend, I'm afraid," said Emma Thompson, the sanctuary's head caretaker, as she joined Oliver at the paddock fence. Emma was a sturdy woman in her 40s with calloused hands and infinite patience, someone who'd successfully rehabilitated everything from abused horses to traumatized farm dogs. But Shadow remained beyond her considerable skills. "I've tried everything. Different foods, music therapy, even aromatherapy," Emma continued, shaking her head. "He just stands there day after day like he's waiting for the next terrible thing to happen to him." Oliver nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of Shadow's suffering. He'd consulted with animal behaviorists from Edinburgh to London, but they all reached the same conclusion. Some trauma ran so deep that healing might be impossible. Shadow had been so systematically abused that his capacity for trust had been completely destroyed. The sound of tires on gravel drew their attention to the sanctuary's main drive, where a dark blue Range Rover was pulling up to the visitor center. Oliver recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to James and Margaret Hartwell, a prosperous couple from nearby Chipping Norton, who'd been supporting the sanctuary for several years. But today's visit was different. Today, they were bringing their newly adopted daughter for her first tour of Meadowbrook. Oliver walked back toward the main building, his mind already shifting to the delicate task ahead. The Hartwells had called the previous week, explaining that 12-year-old Lily had been through a series of unsuccessful foster placements before finally finding stability with them 6 months ago. Margaret had mentioned that Lily seemed drawn to animals, particularly those that had been hurt or abandoned, and they hoped that volunteering at the sanctuary might help her process her own difficult past. As Oliver approached the Range Rover, he watched a slight figure emerge from the back seat. Lily Hartwell was small for her 12 years, with shoulder-length auburn hair that she kept tucked behind her ears and large hazel eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She wore practical clothes, jeans, Wellington boots, and a thick jumper, but there was something in her posture that spoke of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible, to take up as little space as possible in a world that hadn't shown her much kindness. "Dr. Whitmore," James Hartwell called out, striding forward with the confident manner of a successful businessman. At 55, James was everything English prosperity looked like. Tall, well-dressed, with perfectly groomed gray hair and the kind of accent that opened doors in the city. "Thank you for agreeing to show Lily around. We thought this might be exactly what she needs." Margaret Hartwell followed more slowly, her arm protectively around Lily's shoulders. At 48, Margaret had the gentle manner of someone who'd chosen caring over career, her soft features and warm smile suggesting the kind of person who collected wounded creatures, both human and animal. "Lily's been asking about the sanctuary ever since we told her about it," Margaret said, though Oliver noticed that Lily herself remained silent, her eyes already scanning the paddocks visible from the car park. "Of course," Oliver replied, crouching down to Lily's level. "I'm Dr. Whitmore, but everyone here calls me Oliver. Would you like to meet some of our residents?" Lily nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, but her eyes showed the first flicker of genuine interest Oliver had seen. He began leading the small group on the standard tour, past the horse paddocks where rescued thoroughbreds grazed peacefully, through the small animal area where rabbits and guinea pigs lived in spacious enclosures, and along the fence line where sheep and goats clustered for attention from visitors. But it was when they reached Shadow's paddock that everything changed. The Highland bull was in his usual position, pressed against the far stone wall with his back to the world. Most visitors barely noticed him, their attention drawn to the more interactive animals who approached the fence line seeking treats and attention. But Lily stopped walking the moment she saw him. "What's wrong with that one?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the first words she'd spoken since arriving. Oliver exchanged a glance with the Hartwells before answering carefully. "That's Shadow. He's been hurt very badly by people, so he doesn't trust anyone anymore. He's been with us for 6 months, but he won't let anyone get close to him." Lily stepped closer to the fence, her small hands gripping the wooden rails as she studied the motionless bull. "He's scared," she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Yes," Oliver agreed, surprised by her immediate understanding. "Very scared. He thinks if he stays very still and quiet, maybe they won't hurt him anymore," Lily continued, and there was something in her tone that made all 3 adults look at her more closely. "But it doesn't work, does it? Being invisible doesn't make the pain stop." The words hung in the morning air like a confession, and Oliver felt his chest tighten with recognition. This child wasn't just observing Shadow's behavior, she was describing her own survival strategy. As if responding to some invisible signal, Shadow turned his massive head toward the fence. For the first time in 6 months, he looked directly at a human visitor. His dark eyes, scarred but intelligent, locked onto Lily's face, and something passed between them that transcended species, a recognition of shared pain, the acknowledgement of mutual understanding that no adult could fully comprehend. Lily pressed her face closer to the fence. "I know what it's like," she whispered so quietly that only Oliver could hear. "I know what it's like when everyone who's supposed to protect you hurts you instead." Shadow took a step toward the fence, just one step, but it was the first voluntary movement toward a human he'd made since arriving at Meadowbrook. The massive bull and the tiny girl regarded each other across the paddock, 2 wounded souls recognizing something in each other that the rest of the world had tried to break but had failed to destroy completely. The first thing people noticed about Lily Hartwell was how quietly she moved through the world, as if she'd learned that drawing attention meant inviting pain. What they couldn't see were the invisible scars that ran deeper than anything etched into Shadow's hide, the memories of 7 different foster homes, each one a fresh lesson in disappointment and betrayal. Lily had been born to a 16-year-old mother addicted to heroin, taken into care at 18 months when social services found her alone in a flat for 3 days, surviving on whatever she could reach from the floor. The early years were a blur of temporary placements, well-meaning social workers, and the constant message that she was a problem to be solved rather than a child to be loved. The worst placement had been with the Gregorys when Lily was 8. Mrs. A. Gregory had seemed kind during the assessment visits, but behind closed doors, she'd made it clear that foster children were simply a source of income. Lily had learned to hide in cupboards when Mr. Gregory drank, to make herself invisible when his voice grew loud and his hands grew rough. She'd perfected the art of silence, discovering that if she never asked for anything, never complained, never even seemed to exist, the adults might forget she was there long enough for her to feel safe. When social services finally removed her from the Gregorys after a neighbor reported suspicious bruises, Lily had stopped believing that adults could be trusted. She'd moved through 3 more placements like a ghost, polite but distant, helpful but never hopeful, protecting herself with walls that even experienced child psychologists couldn't breach. Then, 6 months ago, she'd been placed with James and Margaret Hartwell. The Hartwells were different from her previous foster parents in ways that had taken Lily months to understand. They didn't seem to want anything from her except for her to feel safe. They didn't raise their voices, didn't drink to excess, didn't look at her like she was a burden or a paycheck. Margaret baked biscuits just because she noticed Lily liked them. James spent his evenings reading quietly in the sitting room, never minding when Lily curled up in the corner with her own book. They asked nothing of her except that she try to heal. But healing, Lily had discovered, was harder than surviving. At least when you were focused on avoiding the next blow, you didn't have time to feel the pain of all the previous ones. Safety, paradoxically, made it harder to keep the memories locked away. Now, standing at Shadow's paddock fence 3 days after their first meeting, Lily understood why the Highland bull pressed himself against the stone wall. Space was safety, distance was protection, and trust was a luxury that neither of them could afford. "You came back," Oliver said gently, approaching from the feed shed with a bucket of hay. He'd been surprised when Margaret had called, asking if Lily could volunteer at the sanctuary on weekends. Most children were drawn to the friendlier animals, but Lily had specifically asked to help with Shadow. "He's still in the same spot," Lily observed, her eyes fixed on the motionless bull. "Does he ever move?" "Only when he thinks no one is watching," Oliver replied, setting down the bucket. "Emma saw him walking about at midnight last week, but the moment he sensed her presence, he went straight back to his corner." Lily nodded, understanding perfectly. "He feels safer when he's invisible." Oliver studied the slight girl beside him, recognizing something in her tone that spoke of personal experience. Margaret had shared some of Lily's history during their phone conversation, enough for Oliver to understand that this child and this bull had more in common than anyone had initially realized. "Would you like to help me feed him?" Oliver asked carefully. "I usually just leave the hay by the gate, but perhaps he might respond differently to you." Lily's eyes widened slightly, the most emotion Oliver had seen her display. "You think he might let me get closer?" "I think," Oliver said slowly, "that sometimes wounded creatures can sense when they're in the presence of someone who truly understands their pain." Together, they approached the paddock gate. Shadow's ears flicked at the sound, but he didn't turn around. Oliver unlatched the gate with practiced quiet, motioning for Lily to follow him into the enclosure. Most visitors weren't allowed in the paddocks with potentially dangerous animals, but Oliver had spent enough years reading animal behavior to know that Shadow's aggression was purely defensive, and something about Lily's presence seemed to calm rather than agitate him. They walked slowly across the grass, stopping about 15 feet from where Shadow stood. Oliver set the hay down and stepped back, but Lily remained where she was, studying the bull's scarred profile with an intensity that made Oliver hold his breath. "I know you can hear me," Lily said softly, her voice barely carrying on the morning breeze. "I know you're pretending not to notice we're here because it's safer that way." Shadow's ear twitched, just slightly, but enough to show he was listening. "I used to do that too," Lily continued, taking a small step closer. "I used to pretend I was invisible, like if I got small enough and quiet enough, maybe the hurt would just pass me by." The massive bull shifted his weight, a barely perceptible movement that brought his scarred head a fraction of an inch in Lily's direction. "But it doesn't work, does it?" Lily's voice cracked slightly. "The hurt finds you anyway, and after a while you start to think that maybe you deserve it. Maybe there's something wrong with you that makes people want to hurt you." Oliver felt tears prick his eyes as he watched this extraordinary child pour her own pain into words that seemed to reach across species barriers. Shadow had turned his head enough that one dark eye was visible, fixed on Lily with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "The thing is," Lily said, taking another small step forward, "I've learned something in the past few months. I've learned that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find people who see the hurt in you and don't want to add to it. They want to help it heal instead." She was now less than 10 feet from Shadow, closer than any human had been since his arrival at the sanctuary. The bull's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more regular, as if her presence was somehow soothing rather than threatening. "Margaret and James, they're like that," Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "They don't want to hurt me, they just want me to feel safe. And Oliver here, he's like that too. He brought you to this place because he wants you to feel safe. Shadow turned fully toward her now, his massive frame still pressed against the wall, but his attention completely focused on this small human who spoke his language of pain and survival. The scars around his eyes were more visible from this angle, white lines that spoke of deliberate cruelty, but his gaze held no aggression, only a cautious curiosity that hadn't been there before. "I don't know what they did to you," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "But I know how it feels to be hurt by people who were supposed to protect you. I know how it feels to be scared all the time, to expect pain even when people are trying to be kind." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something Oliver couldn't quite see, a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "I brought you something," she said, unwrapping what appeared to be a piece of brown bread. "Margaret baked it yesterday. She says food tastes better when it's made with love, and I thought maybe you'd never tasted anything like that before." Shadow's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of the fresh bread. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Bull and Child regarded each other across the vast distance of their shared trauma. Then, with a movement so careful it seemed choreographed, Shadow took a step forward. Oliver held his breath as the massive Highland bull approached Lily, his shaggy coat stirring in the morning breeze. Shadow stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough for Lily to see the intelligence in his dark eyes, close enough for him to study this small human who spoke of hurt and healing in the same breath. Lily extended her hand, palm up, the piece of bread resting in the center. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you. I promise." Shadow lowered his great head, and with a gentleness that defied his size and scars, he delicately took the bread from Lily's palm. His lips barely brushed her skin, but the contact was electric, the first voluntary touch between Shadow and a human being since his rescue. As Shadow chewed the bread, something extraordinary happened. The tension that had held his massive frame rigid for months began to ease. His breathing deepened, his stance relaxed. And for the first time since arriving at Meadowbrook, he looked directly into a human's eyes without fear. "Thank you," Lily whispered, and Oliver wasn't sure if she was speaking to Shadow or to something larger, to the universe, perhaps, for allowing two wounded souls to find each other in a world that had shown them both so little kindness. If this story of healing and hope is touching your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of how love can overcome even the deepest wounds. Your support helps us share these powerful reminders that no one, human or animal, is ever too broken to heal. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened across the Cotswolds, both Lily and Shadow began to emerge from their protective shells with a tentative courage that amazed everyone at Meadowbrook Sanctuary. Lily arrived every Saturday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a small rucksack filled with treats Margaret had prepared, chunks of apple, homemade bread, occasionally a handful of carrots from their kitchen garden. But more than the food, she brought something invaluable: patience without expectation, presence without pressure, and most importantly, the understanding that healing couldn't be rushed. "She's extraordinary," Emma Thompson confided to Oliver as they watched Lily sitting cross-legged in Shadow's paddock, reading aloud from a copy of The Secret Garden. The Highland bull lay in the grass beside her, close enough that his breath stirred her auburn hair, but not quite touching. "I've never seen anything like it. He's actually relaxed." Oliver nodded, his heart full as he witnessed the daily miracle unfolding before them. Shadow had begun to eat during daylight hours, his massive frame gradually filling out as proper nutrition worked its magic. The dullness had started to leave his coat, revealing glints of the rich russet brown beneath. Most remarkably, he'd started to explore his paddock, no longer confining himself to the corner against the stone wall. But the changes in Lily were equally profound. The silent, withdrawn child who'd first visited 3 months ago had begun to speak more freely, not just to Shadow, but to the other sanctuary staff. She'd started helping with chores, mucking out stalls, filling water troughs, assisting with feeding routines. Her movements had gained confidence, her shoulders no longer hunched in perpetual defense. "The remarkable thing," Oliver explained to a visiting veterinary psychologist from Bristol University, "is how they've healed each other. The child's trauma helped her understand the bull's needs, while caring for him has given her a sense of purpose and worth she'd never experienced before." Dr. Sarah Whitfield, the psychology professor, observed the pair through the paddock fence with professional fascination. "It's a perfect example of symbiotic healing," she murmured, making notes. "The child processes her own trauma by providing care and protection to another wounded being. Meanwhile, the bull experiences his first safe relationship with a human, allowing him to begin trusting again." The breakthrough moment came on a gray November morning when Lily arrived to find Shadow standing near the paddock gate. The first time he'd voluntarily positioned himself closer to human activity. When she entered the enclosure, instead of his usual cautious approach, Shadow walked directly to her and gently lowered his massive head until it rested against her shoulder. "Oh!" Lily gasped, tears streaming down her face as she carefully wrapped her thin arms around Shadow's neck. "It's okay, my beautiful boy. We're both safe now." Emma, watching from nearby, felt her own eyes well up. In 6 months, Shadow had never initiated physical contact with anyone. Yet here he was, seeking comfort from a 12-year-old girl who understood his language of healing. The news of their remarkable bond began to spread throughout the local community. The Cotswolds Gazette ran a feature story about the miracle at Meadowbrook, and visitors started arriving specifically to witness the unlikely friendship. But Oliver was careful to limit access, understanding that both Lily and Shadow needed their relationship to remain protected from too much outside attention. Margaret and James Hartwell watched their daughter's transformation with wonder and gratitude. The angry, withdrawn child they'd welcomed into their home was blossoming into someone confident enough to share her thoughts, brave enough to ask for help when needed, and secure enough to believe she deserved love. "She's teaching me things I never knew about resilience," Margaret confided to Oliver during one of her visits. "Yesterday, she told me that Shadow helped her understand that being hurt doesn't make you broken. It just makes you careful. And that being careful isn't the same as being afraid." By December, Shadow had become the unofficial ambassador for the sanctuary's rehabilitation program. School groups would visit specifically to hear Lily tell his story, and she'd discovered she had a gift for helping other children understand that healing was possible, even after terrible experiences. One particularly meaningful moment came when a group of children from a local care home visited. A 10-year-old boy named Marcus, who'd been repeatedly failed by the foster system, stood transfixed by Shadow's gentle presence. "He looks sad," Marcus whispered to Lily. "He was very sad," Lily replied gently. "People hurt him badly before he came here. But look at him now. He's not afraid anymore. He knows he's safe." Marcus studied Shadow intently. Do you think if someone's been hurt a lot, they can still learn to trust people again?" Lily smiled, the first truly radiant expression Oliver had ever seen on her face. "I know they can," she said with absolute certainty. "Because Shadow taught me that healing isn't about forgetting what happened to you. It's about learning that not everyone is going to hurt you." As winter settled over Meadowbrook, Shadow and Lily's daily routine had become the heartbeat of the sanctuary. They were proof that sometimes the most broken things could become the most beautiful, that trauma could be transformed into wisdom, and that love, patient, unconditional, and persistent, really could heal even the deepest wounds. The girl who had only known rejection had found her purpose in loving the bull who had only known pain. And in saving each other, they had discovered something profound. That healing was not a destination, but a journey, best traveled in the company of someone who understood exactly where you'd been. Spring arrived at Meadowbrook Sanctuary with an explosion of daffodils and the kind of golden sunshine that made even the most damaged hearts dare to hope. It had been nearly a year since Shadow's arrival, and as Oliver watched Lily leading the Highland bull around the paddock with nothing more than a gentle rope halter, he marveled at the complete transformation of both wounded souls. Shadow now stood proud and magnificent, his russet coat gleaming with health, his scars visible but no longer defining him. He moved with the confident grace of an animal who knew he was safe, loved, and valued. Most remarkably, he'd become the sanctuary's unofficial therapy animal, somehow sensing which visitors needed his calm presence most. "Ladies and gentlemen," Oliver announced to the gathered crowd of donors and supporters, "I'd like you to meet our success story, Shadow and Lily, living proof that love really can heal the deepest wounds." The crowd, nearly 50 people, including local dignitaries, veterinary students, and families who'd been touched by their story, applauded warmly as Lily, now 13 and radiant with confidence, led Shadow to the center of the demonstration area. She wore the sanctuary's official volunteer uniform with pride, her auburn hair catching the spring sunlight as she smiled genuinely for the first time in her life. "When Shadow first came to us," Lily began, her voice clear and strong, "he was so frightened that he wouldn't let anyone within 10 feet of him. He'd been hurt so badly that he'd forgotten how to trust." She paused, her hand resting on Shadow's massive neck. "I understood how he felt because I'd been hurt too. I'd learned to be invisible, to expect pain from the people who were supposed to protect me." The crowd listened in rapt silence as Lily continued. "But Dr. Whitmore and the amazing staff here at Meadowbrook showed us both that not all people are cruel. And my parents, Margaret and James, showed me what real love looks like: patient, kind, and never giving up on you even when you can't believe in yourself." Margaret Hartwell dabbed at her eyes, overwhelmed with pride at the articulate, compassionate young woman her daughter had become. James stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them marveling at how far they'd all traveled from that first tentative visit a year ago. "The most important thing Shadow taught me," Lily continued, "is that healing isn't about forgetting what happened to you. It's about learning that your past doesn't have to control your future. He showed me that even when you've been broken, you can still choose to love, to trust, and to help others who are hurting." As if understanding her words, Shadow turned his great head and gently nuzzled Lily's cheek, drawing delighted gasps from the audience. The gesture was so natural, so full of affection, that it was impossible to believe this was the same terrified animal who'd arrived 12 months ago. "Now Shadow and I work together to help other children who've been through difficult experiences," Lily explained. "We visit care homes and schools, and Shadow shows them that if a bull who was so badly hurt can learn to trust again, then maybe they can too." Dr. Whitfield from Bristol University stepped forward to address the crowd. "What we've witnessed here challenges everything we thought we knew about trauma recovery," she said. "Lily and Shadow have created their own healing methodology based on mutual understanding, patient presence, and unconditional acceptance. We're now documenting their techniques to help other traumatized children and animals." The celebration continued with tours of the sanctuary, but the most moving moment came when Marcus, the boy from the care home who'd first met Shadow the previous winter, arrived with his new foster family. At age 10, he'd been deemed difficult to place by social services, but something about his interaction with Shadow had sparked hope in both him and his potential parents. "Lily!" Marcus called out, running across the grass with his foster mother close behind. "Look, I got adopted too, and we're getting a rescue dog next week." Lily's face lit up with pure joy as she hugged the younger boy. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. Remember what Shadow taught us. Being hurt doesn't make you broken. It just makes you more able to help others." As the day wound down and the last visitors departed, Lily sat in Shadow's paddock, her back against his warm flank as she watched the sunset paint the Cotswolds in shades of gold and rose. Margaret approached with a thermos of hot chocolate and settled beside them. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Margaret asked gently. Lily was quiet for a moment, stroking Shadow's neck with the easy familiarity born of countless hours together. "I was thinking about how different everything is now," she said finally. "A year ago, I thought I was too damaged to ever have a real family or friends who understood me. I thought pain was all I was good for." "And now?" Margaret prompted. "Now I know that pain can be transformed into purpose," Lily replied with wisdom far beyond her 13 years. "Shadow and I, we take our hurt and use it to help others heal. We've turned our worst experiences into our greatest strength." Shadow rumbled contentedly, his breathing deep and peaceful as the three of them sat together in comfortable silence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The bull who had only known pain had learned to trust. The child who had only known rejection had found her forever family. And together they had discovered that sometimes the most broken pieces can create the most beautiful whole when they're held together by love. If this incredible journey of healing and hope has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us share more stories of triumph over trauma and reminds us all that no one, human or animal, is ever too broken to heal. Thank you for being part of Shadow and Lily's story, the bull who only knew pain. until an adopted child who also knew pain found him.